So let me give you a quick review of what we've got going on in this video. It's all about making a cape for the Keaton Batman from the Flash movie. But I know this part right here is a little too fast. So we're going to slow it all the way down and go in piece by piece to be able to find out how this cape was really constructed so that you can repeat the process. So let's get started. In this project in particular, we're going to use that rotary blade quite often. We're going to use that double-sided tape or that iron-on tape to make the hem and our black pleather. Now, with this figure, you've probably come across that it is incredibly difficult to remove the neck off of the torso. And that's because it's glued in really well. The glue they used on this is completely different than the other glue they used before. You can heat it up all you want, but all it's going to do is going to soften the plastic and it's going to tear when you pull it. Now, some have been very fortunate that their figure has very little glue and they're able to remove it. In this case, the glue was there and it was there to stay. And, well, it was not meant to be removed. So starting with our rotary blade, we're going to cut into our material that we've cut into a 9 by 10 inches. And we're going to cut 2.5 inches off the top diagonally. Right off the top over here, you can place the figure on the left so you can see approximately where those 2.5 inches will fall. And we don't want to cut it too small or too big because we don't want it to drag and we don't want it to stay too high off of the ground. So taking a look here, 2.5 inches off the top, take your straight edge, your ruler, whatever it is you've got, and cut off at an angle 2.5 inches. There we go. All set. 2.5 inches. Boom. That's it. Now you've got your V cut into your material, we're going to have to hem it. You can sew it if you want. I find it is just easier on these pleather capes to use the iron-on tape. This is a little thick, a little wide, so we're going to trim it down to about 1/8 of an inch. So we are going to take some scissors, cut into one of the edges, and cut all the way to the very end. We're going to speed up the process here because this is going to take forever. And we don't have that much time. It's only a 16-minute video. So let's get this rolling really quickly. So now that you've got your pleather ironed out and you've got the hem on the edge and folded over about 1/4 inch, you are ready to cut the scallops. So you fold it in half one more time, this time inside out, with the hem on the outside, and you can iron in the left side to pleat it. The more you make that pleat, or the better pleat you make, the easier it is to then cut the scallops because it's going to retain the shape. Now, you fold it over to the edge because you want to see how far you have or you can cut into so that you don't have an odd looking cape. Now you can do that by placing the original cape off of the Keaton figure and use it as a pattern. And if you place it halfway into the half that you are looking at on your cutting mat, of course you've got to straighten it out horizontally, then you'll know your pattern to cut. And now it's easiest if you take a felt tip marker, in this case a Sharpie, a silver Sharpie, and you dot the pattern. Don't drag the pen on the material because it can skip and it can actually pull the material. So if you use dots, it just makes it a little bit easier and it gives you a nice clean look. And you'll be able to cut it much easier because you'll have an easy line to follow. Once again, you're going to need a new blade or at least a very good blade because you don't want the material to start snagging and then you end up cutting this incorrectly. So here you go. You've got your dotted lines ready to follow. And if you want to make any corrections on those scallops, this is the time to do it. And just take that pen and make a new line of dots. And then you can erase the one on the inside if it's visible by painting it over. So here we go. It's time to cut. Now I find that it's much easier to cut if you pull the blade toward you instead of pushing it away from you. you have more control, it's a neater cut, and once again, it's a lot easier to make smaller cuts instead of one continuous cut. So you'll have a lot of fragmented pieces left over. Keep those remnants. You don't know when you'll end up using them, especially for test pieces. So here's our blade, rotary blade, once again, starting at the edge and cutting toward you. And just be careful, because it is a new blade, and it does have a nice fine edge. But you'll see that you'll end up with a nice clean cut, and, well, my mistake, I don't have a nice clean cut here. But as you can tell, you have a little bit more control to making those curves. And on this one here, I did cut it into one large piece. On the other one that I just recently cut, I cut into smaller segments, and it was a lot easier. You'll see that in the video that I uploaded earlier this afternoon, or I should say, yeah, this afternoon. And it has actually the blue cape, and you'll see how that was cut. Now, getting back to this here, as soon as you've got your scallops cut, you can then come back and use your pattern to see where those scallops fall. And you'll see that you have one extra at the top, left and right, so you can have a larger cape. And the reason is because you're going to add those splines, it's going to take up some of that material. You can iron out each one of those splines toward the center, and that way you can have a line to follow when you use your sewing machine. So we're not going to sew each and every one of those. We're only going to add 3 wires. The main wire at the front of the chest, and the 2 wires along the back, which are going to be folded over in half, making it look like there's actually 4 wires. Now, in this case, for this particular figure, I'm not adding any wires, but I am adding the splines in there so that it has a better shape, and it keeps its the contour of the cape that much better when it hangs over the shoulders. Now, if you look right here, we need to cut that center peg hole for the neck. So once you adjust your pattern cape, which is the original off of the figure, you can then mark out where you're going to cut that center cutout for the neck hole. In this case, again, I'm going to use a silver Sharpie to mark out the center, and that's going to make it much easier to make the cutout with the pair of scissors. Or if you've got a hole punch, it's going to work that much nicer. It's going to look nice and clean with a hole punch. This is stretch pleather, so it will stretch and fit over the hole. I'll show you a little bit later how to fix that situation with the neck that I'm sure you've come across, because it's really difficult to remove it. If you remove that emblem, you may tear it as well, so just leave it right where it is. The material that's folded over is barely thin enough to fit underneath that cowl or that emblem that's in the front of the chest. Now, if you add a wire to it, be sure that it's a thinner gauge wire so that it does not cause an excessive thickness on the edge or the seam of the cape, that it doesn't allow the neck to sit down flush. Now, if you do this correctly, you'll be able to see that when you push that neck down, it will sit flush. You will have to glue it down before gluing down the neck, but we'll get back to that in a moment. In the meantime, I do want to show you the actual scallops on the cape, that I did not sew them all the way to the edge. I only sewn them to about a ½ inch from the edge of the scallop. Why? Because I want to retain the shape of the scallop. If I sew it all the way to the edge, it's going to cause a distortion, and it's just going to look really bad. Now, once you get to those edges, you can either sear the edge or singe the edge, or you can tie a knot on the end of those threads. I'm just going to singe it. It's much quicker, it's easier, and it works really well because it just melts that thread and locks it into place. And as you can tell, I veered off to the edge of the side of the fabric so that I have a tapering edge and I don't have to worry about the wire going through there. Now, if you're a patient person and you don't want to use the lighter to singe the edge of those threads, then you can tie a couple knots. you want to tie a double knot so that it does not unravel. Again, the lighter method is much more efficient and it works really well. It's much quicker. Just be careful not to singe the actual fabric, only the thread that you are wanting to lock in place. Now, going back to the actual look of the figure, I want you to see what it looks like now. Remember, you want to sew those splines all the way to the top because you want them to come out from underneath the collar like this. If you don't sew them all the way to the top of the collar, you're going to have some open spots and it's just going to look bad. It's not going to look neat. This is what your cape should look like without wires once you've fully installed it. Now, often people ask, well, what gauge wire do I use if I want to wire my cape? Well, that all depends on the material that you are working with. The lighter material that you use, the thinner gauge wire that you will need, like a 24 or even a 26. Now, the heavier the material, the heavier gauge wire you need, like a 20, even an 18. It just depends how much thicker that material is, how much heavier. If you choose the material first, then that will dictate what the gauge wire that you are going to need. However, if you choose a material that is too thick and a wire that is too heavy, then it's going to be incredibly difficult to install a wired cape on any of these figures, and it's just not going to look natural. So thinner wire, thinner material makes for a better looking cape and an easier installation no matter what figure you're installing it on. However, let's get back to the situation with the neck and the torso on this figure and find out how to fix it. Yes, there is a way to fix it, and I've already done so off camera. I'm just going to show you what it is I did. Now, once you glue the cape around the area in the neck and allow it to dry, you want to drill with your vise drill into the chest through the neck. There is an actual support in there, other piece of plastic, of course. And now you're going to add your Loctite super glue. Why Loctite? Because it's a gel that dries clear. It will have a strong bond. That's what Loctite is for. It's super glue. Now, soon as you've got that down, you want to take a very tiny screw and a very tiny screwdriver, obviously, because that is what's going to hold it together. And just remember that once you do this, it's going to be a permanent fix. You're not going to be removing the head or the cape. There is a small perforation at the bottom, or I should say hollow, that allows the head of the screw to fall into it, and it's not going to be an issue for the ball peg that's going to hold the actual head sculpt. Now, as you can tell, it holds it in tight, it's going to dry, and it's going to be there for good. This is the time that you want to now decide what head sculpt you want on this torso, because you're not going to be pulling it on and off to switch it out. The more you mess with this, the more you're going to weaken that joint that you just glued. So be mindful of what you want to do with this figure before you glue it down like this. Now, this is the cape that you'll want to use for a museum look. It's going to fit into any of the vehicles, and I'm going to leave you now with some video that's going to show you the cape without the wire in the full museum pose, and then the next clip with the wire. In the meantime, if you have any questions, leave it in the comments below, and of course, keep customizing. We'll see you here next time.